power, duty, and democracy. It started like any other weekend on social media. But by nightfall, Tanzania's online space had erupted. In a dimly lit home office, a man in uniform appeared on camera. With calm but firm words, Captain Tesher spoke for over 40 minutes. He did not shout, nor did he call for unrest. Instead, he laid out concerns about what he described as corruption, injustice, and moral decline within key institutions. He accused certain officials of misusing national resources and turning patriotism into performance. He claimed that ordinary citizens were paying the price for a system that no longer served them. Within minutes, his message was being shared across platforms YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and X, formerly Twitter. Tanzanian citizens at home and abroad began to discuss his words. Some saw courage. Others feared instability. Authorities responded swiftly. Security agencies reportedly went on alert, and efforts were made to remove the footage from major social platforms. But by then, the message had already gone global. Once a recording circulates online, it becomes part of the digital public square impossible to fully erase. The government's initial response was restrained. The Ministry of Defense issued a brief statement reaffirming discipline within the ranks, without directly mentioning Captain Tesher. State television focused on routine presidential engagements, a signal of continuity and control. But silence can sometimes speak louder than words. Many Tanzanians began asking whether their officer's speech reflected isolated frustration or a deeper unease within the country's institutions. At markets, on buses, and in cafes, conversations turned serious. If an officer can speak like that, one resident told a journalist off record, then maybe the problem is real. Political analysts across the region began calling it Tanzania's most significant moral test in years. To understand the moment, one must understand the man. Born in northern Tanzania's Arusha region in the late 1980s, Captain John Charles Tesher built his career quietly but steadily. A graduate of the Mandalay Military Academy, he was known as a disciplined instructor in weapons handling and tactical operations, a professional respected by peers and juniors alike. Colleagues describe him as a thinker, not a showman. 4 years, he served without controversy. But, according to people familiar with his work, frustration had been growing. Reports suggest that younger officers increasingly complained about favoritism, procurement issues, and a widening gap between military ideals and political realities. For Captain John Charles Tesher, the situation reportedly became unbearable after a sensitive internal inquiry into missing military fuel was discontinued. It was said to be the moment he began keeping personal notes, carefully documenting irregularities he believed were undermining the integrity of the uniform. Those records would later form the foundation of his now famous broadcast. In most countries, and certainly in Tanzania, members of the armed forces rarely speak publicly about politics. Doing so risks their careers and sometimes their freedom. That is why Captain John Charles Tesher's choice to go live on social media was so unusual. Observers believe it was a calculated act rather than a reckless one. By speaking in public, he placed himself in the open, ensuring that any attempt to silence him would be visible to the world. His calm tone, steady pacing, and absence of inflammatory language suggested that his purpose was not rebellion, but revelation. He spoke of honor, duty, and the meaning of loyalty. When a soldier guards the gate of the corrupt, he said, while citizens suffer, he has already betrayed his flag. To many listeners, it sounded less like defiance and more like a plea for conscience. To understand why Captain John Charles Tesher's speech resonated, we must look at the political environment that shaped it. For nearly 5 decades, Tanzania's ruling party, Chama Cha Mapinduzi, CCM, has dominated the political scene. Born in 1977 under the ideals of the country's founding father, Julius Nyerere, CCM built its reputation on unity, discipline, and self-reliance. Over time, however, many citizens began to feel that the party's once revolutionary spirit had been replaced by bureaucracy and self-protection. Under various administrations, Tanzania experienced progress and challenges in equal measure. The presidency of John Pombe Magufuli between 2015 and 2021 brought a wave of assertive nationalism and anti-corruption rhetoric. He was loved by some for his tough stance and criticized by others for his uncompromising leadership style. His sudden death in 2021 marked a major turning point. Under President Samia Suluhu Hassan, Tanzania sought to restore calm and international confidence. Investment returned, donor relations improved, and political discourse softened. Yet, within that calm, some citizens perceived a return to complacency, a system stable on the surface, but with unresolved questions underneath. It was in this atmosphere that Captain John Charles Tesher's message landed, questioning whether peace built on silence can last. In his broadcast, Captain Tesher also spoke about what he called a shadow network operating behind official institutions, a claim that resonated with long-standing public suspicions. Analysts say every political system develops its own inner structures of influence, a network of long-serving officials, business leaders, and advisors who ensure continuity regardless of elections or leadership changes. In Tanzania, these networks are often credited with maintaining stability. Critics, however, argue that such systems can sometimes suppress accountability and slow reform. Captain John Charles Tesher's words drew attention to this tension between continuity and change. His message suggested that when governance becomes too protective of itself, it risks losing touch with the people it was designed to serve. Human rights groups have occasionally voiced similar concerns, citing cases of restricted press freedom and harassment of activists. Yet, it is equally true that Tanzania remains one of East Africa's safest and most organized nations, a country where civic order and national identity are deeply valued. The challenge, therefore, lies in balancing security with openness, a dilemma shared by many nations across the continent. What makes this episode particularly significant is how it connects with a broader African conversation. Across the continent, societies are debating the same fundamental issue: how to ensure accountability without jeopardizing stability. In recent years, parts of West and Central Africa have witnessed military takeovers, justified by claims of corruption and poor governance. While each case is different, the underlying message is similar. Citizens are demanding systems that protect justice and opportunity for all. Analysts caution, however, that military intervention cannot substitute for strong institutions. Sustainable progress comes from transparent governance, fair elections, and civic participation. Captain Tesher's statement, regardless of its intent, has therefore sparked a wider reflection not only within Tanzania but across Africa about how to strengthen institutions before frustration spills into crisis. For Tanzania's leadership, the challenge is complex. On one hand, discipline within the armed forces is essential for national unity. On the other, citizens expect leaders to address legitimate grievances rather than suppress them. So far, the government has avoided confrontation, focusing instead on reassurance and stability. Observers hope that this restraint signals an intention to investigate concerns rather than escalate tension. Political experts note that Tanzania's greatest strength has always been its ability to manage challenges through dialogue and reform, not through violence or fear. If that tradition continues, the current episode may yet become an opportunity for introspection and renewal. Captain Tesher's speech has become more than a national story. It has raised an enduring question for Africa when governance falters. Who should lead renewal, the people through civic participation, or those within the system who feel compelled to act? Most African nations today are still refining that balance between authority and accountability. The hope is that reform will always come through peaceful dialogue, free media, and strong institutions, not through confrontation. As historians often remind us, stability built on silence can be fragile. Real peace comes when citizens feel heard and protected. For Tanzania, this may mark a defining moment, not a crisis, but a mirror. Captain Tesher's words have forced the nation to ask what loyalty truly means: obedience to command, or commitment to justice. If handled wisely, this situation could strengthen national unity. Open discussion, institutional reform, and responsible communication can ensure that the military remains a symbol of honor and neutrality, while citizens regain confidence in their democracy. Whatever happens next, one truth stands firm: silence can no longer substitute for dialogue. And for Tanzania, a nation with a proud legacy of peace and discipline, that dialogue may determine the next chapter of its history. Across Africa, millions of young people watched Tesher's video not because they desired disruption, but because they seek integrity in leadership. They want governments that are transparent, armies that remain professional, and societies that reward honesty. This is not a call for conflict, it is a call for reform. The story of Captain Tesher reminds leaders, soldiers, and citizens alike that patriotism means holding each other accountable to the ideals upon which nations are built. Whether in Tanzania, Ghana, Nigeria, or Kenya, the same principle applies: nations endure not through fear, but through fairness. In conclusion, the events surrounding Captain John Charles Tesher reveal both risk and hope. The risk of misunderstanding courage as rebellion, and the hope that truth, when spoken peacefully, can renew a nation's moral compass. Tanzania now faces a choice: to silence the voice of dissent or to listen to it as a signal for reform. The decision it makes will echo far beyond its borders, across a continent still striving to align power with purpose. When a soldier speaks for justice, is it disobedience or devotion to the very oath he took to defend the Republic? That is the question Tanzania must answer. For Africa Lights News, I'm your host. Thank you for watching. If you value calm, fact-based reporting that focuses on Africa's dignity, history, and progress, don't forget to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to the channel for more balanced stories about our continent's unfolding future.
Family and friends of a 4 years old Alino Faso gather in silence as a flag-covered casket returns home to Burkina Faso. Tears flow freely. Some hold candles, others raise the national flag. For many, this moment is not just about mourning a man, but about the meaning of sovereignty, pride, and justice in modern Africa. Alino Faso, a respected citizen, activist, and voice of reform, had been detained in Ivory Coast since January. Accused of espionage, he was later reported dead under unclear circumstances. What began as a diplomatic issue has evolved into one of the most consequential moments in West Africa's recent history. When news of his death broke, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the leader of Burkina Faso, did not send a message of sympathy. Instead, he issued an order that would shake regional politics: the mobilization of 3,000 troops along the southern border. It was no longer just about one man's death. It had become a test of sovereignty, a question of how long African nations could endure loss, silence, and perceived injustice before asserting their right to stand firm. The story began quietly, far from the headlines. Alino Faso was known for his digital activism, a passionate communicator who used his platform to advocate for African self-reliance, youth empowerment, and dignity in governance. Born in Bobo Dioulasso, he rose from humble beginnings to become one of Burkina Faso's most followed online voices. His message was consistent: Africa must learn to depend on itself. In January 2025, Alino traveled to Ivory Coast for what he described to close friends as a cultural exchange mission. Weeks later, he was arrested by Ivorian authorities, accused of espionage and conspiracy, serious charges that carried a heavy political undertone. His supporters called for transparency. Human rights organizations sought access. For months, there was silence. Then, in July 2025, an official statement from Abidjan announced that Alino Faso had died in custody. Authorities described it as suicide. No images, no witnesses, and no full medical report were released. The explanation, brief and technical, failed to convince many in Burkina Faso. For those who had followed his work, the news felt like déjà vu: another African voice silenced too soon, another unanswered question buried in diplomatic formality. Online, hashtags demanding justice for Alino trended across Francophone Africa. In Ouagadougou, spontaneous gatherings began forming in the city's main square. Within 48 hours, the protests spread to several towns. Placards read, "You silenced a man, not a movement." To the demonstrators, Alino's death was not only personal, it was symbolic, a reminder of the many Africans who had spoken truth to power and paid the price. Inside Burkina Faso's government, the mood was tense. Senior officials viewed Alino's death not simply as a tragic loss but as a violation of human dignity. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs sent a formal note to Abidjan demanding an independent inquiry and access to case documents. The Ivorian government, citing legal restrictions, declined. That refusal was the turning point. Within days, President Captain Ibrahim Traoré convened a closed-door meeting at the presidential compound. According to sources familiar with the discussions, the meeting was not about war. It was about drawing a line. The decision was made to mobilize troops along key border points, Bamford, Sindao, and Niangoloko under a new security initiative called Operation Southern Shield. Officially, the operation was defensive. The government described it as a measure to safeguard territorial integrity and prevent further cross-border destabilization. Yet to observers, the symbolism was unmistakable. Burkina Faso was asserting that the era of quiet entrance was over. For decades, West African diplomacy had often favored restraint, even in the face of provocation. This time, however, a smaller, landlocked nation had decided to show strength, not submission. International reactions were swift. Western media labeled the move provocative. The Ivorian government urged restraint and dialogue, calling on regional bodies like ECOWAS to mediate. But across Africa, the response was more complex. In many online forums, citizens from other countries viewed Burkina Faso's action not as aggression, but as an awakening, a symbolic defense of African dignity, in a global system often perceived as unequal. To understand why Burkina Faso's death had such an impact, one must first understand who he was, and why his voice resonated. Alino was part of a generation of African digital creators who saw social media as a new frontier for civic engagement. His short videos, often filmed with modest equipment, discussed everything from economic dependency to cultural identity. He spoke the language of the streets, mixing humors with honesty and hope with hard truths. He often said, "We cannot keep asking others to feed us and expect them not to own our hunger." For millions of young Africans, that sentence became a slogan. His digital influence made him a target for both admiration and criticism. To some officials, he was a political irritant, to others, a patriotic educator. But whatever label one chose, his impact was undeniable. That is why, when his death was announced, disbelief quickly turned into collective outrage. The return of his remains to Burkina Faso became a national moment. Tens of thousands gathered to receive the coffin. Women sang traditional songs of remembrance. Soldiers saluted in silence. Children held signs that read, "He died for truth." For President Ibrahim Traoré, the funeral was more than a memorial. It was a defining moment of leadership. In his speech that day, he said calmly, "They can take the body of a Burkina, but they cannot take the soul of our independence." It was both a tribute and a declaration. While public attention focused on Alino's case, deeper tensions had been simmering between Burkina Faso and Ivory Coast for months. Intelligence reports had alleged that remnants of Burkina Faso's previous political elite exiled after the 2022 transition were operating from Ivorian territory. Some were suspected of coordinating online misinformation and attempting to destabilize the Burkina government. Abidjan denied the allegations. Yet, within Burkina Faso's leadership circle, those suspicions were considered proof that the nation's sovereignty was under quiet threat. In that context, Alino's death was not seen as an isolated tragedy but as part of a larger pattern, a symptom of foreign influence and political rivalry spilling across borders. Thus, Operation Southern Shield was launched not out of vengeance, but as a message of deterrence. Burkina Faso would not allow external actors to manipulate its internal affairs. Still, diplomacy continued. Envoys were sent, discussions proposed, and back-channel communications opened. But trust was thin, and public emotion was high. To fully grasp the meaning of this confrontation, it helps to step back several decades to the ideological divide that has long shaped West Africa's identity. In the 1980s, Burkina Faso's revolutionary leader Thomas Sankara championed self-reliance, anti-corruption, and independence from foreign control. Across the border, Ivory Coast's founding president, Félix Houphouët-Boigny, represented the opposite model: cooperation with Western powers and prioritization of economic stability. The two visions, one revolutionary, one reformist, became defining philosophies in Francophone Africa. Sankar's assassination in 1987 ended his revolution, but not his legacy. Over time, his ideas evolved into a moral compass for younger generations, seeking dignity in governance. Decades later, Captain Ibrahim Traoré emerged as a figure many described as Sankar's ideological heir. Meanwhile, the Ivory Coast under President Alassane Ouattara remained one of West Africa's closest allies of Western institutions and investors. That historical contrast, revolutionary independence versus pragmatic alignment, remains central to today's political dynamics. So when a Burkina activist died in Ivorian custody, it reawakened memories of past betrayals and unfinished struggles. For many in Ouagadougou, it felt like history repeating itself, and this time, they vowed not to watch in silence. The mobilization of troops near the border quickly drew regional attention. Mali and Niger, Burkina Faso's partners in the Alliance of Sahel States (AES), publicly expressed solidarity. Malian state media described the deployment as a defense of African dignity. In contrast, ECOWAS called for restraint and dialogue, emphasizing the importance of maintaining regional peace. Observers described the divide as symbolic of a broader continental split between nations seeking new forms of autonomy and those still operating within traditional frameworks of international partnership. Within Burkina Faso, national morale surged. Citizens organized volunteer security units and community defense brigades. The tone was not one of aggression, but of renewed unity. "The South is our border, not for sale," read new posters in the streets of Ouagadougou. The mood was one of discipline rather than defiance. Officials repeated that the deployment was preventive, not provocative. Still, the message to the world was clear: Burkina Faso would defend its dignity through strength, not speeches. In Abidjan, officials sought to de-escalate the situation. The Ivorian government reiterated that it had followed due legal process and expressed readiness for dialogue under ECOWAS supervision. Foreign diplomats urged both nations to prioritize peace, warning that any confrontation could destabilize the region's fragile balance. Behind closed doors, however, analysts admitted that something irreversible had shifted. The Sahel's younger leaders were changing the traditional rules of African diplomacy. Where older governments might have relied on external mediation, these leaders preferred direct action and visible deterrence. International media outlets compared the situation to earlier moments in African post-colonial history when newly independent nations redefined what sovereignty meant in practice. Yet, like those early decades, today's leaders were operating in an age of instant communication, where every decision was amplified online, shaping narratives in real time. This standoff, many commentators now say, is not simply a political or military issue. It is an ideological one. One side represents a model of African governance centered on self-determination, resource control, and resistance to dependency. The other emphasizes international cooperation, economic partnerships, and diplomatic caution. Both have their merits, both their risks. Yet the tension between them reflects the enduring question facing the continent: how can Africa protect its sovereignty while maintaining peace and progress? For Captain Ibrahim Traoré, that question defines his presidency. His critics accuse him of taking unnecessary risks. His supporters praise him for restoring national pride. Either way, his leadership has forced the continent to reconsider long-standing assumptions about dependency and diplomacy. Beyond Burkina Faso and Ivory Coast, Alino Faso's death has become a continental symbol. Across the Sahel and beyond, discussions about African unity and accountability have intensified. In universities, on radio shows, and across social media, citizens debate whether nations should prioritize independence or interdependence. The story has reignited calls for African-led justice systems, regional self-sufficiency, and the redefinition of foreign relations. Even in countries far from the Sahel, the ripple is being felt. Senegal, Guinea, and Chad have begun reviewing their security arrangements and economic frameworks with foreign powers. The shift is gradual but significant. As one commentator in Dakar put it, What we are witnessing is not rebellion, it is reorientation. Africa is relearning how to stand. In the months following his burial, Alino Faso's legacy has continued to grow. Schools have quoted his speeches. Artists have composed songs in his honor. His social media accounts, now archived, are being studied by young activists across the continent. In death, he has achieved what he long advocated in life, a continent reflecting on its own voice. His family remains quiet, asking only for truth and respect. His mother, speaking softly at his funeral, said, "He believed in words, not weapons." I hope his words live longer than his body. And in many ways, they have. For Burkina Faso, the events of 2025 mark the birth of what officials now describe as a doctrine of active defense, the belief that sovereignty must be protected, both through dialogue and readiness. This policy shift has redefined how the Sahel Alliance approaches regional politics. The goal, officials insist, is not confrontation, but deterrence, not to isolate, but equality in partnership. Observers say this approach could reshape West African diplomacy for decades to come. If Burkina Faso manages to maintain stability while asserting independence, it could offer a new model for smaller nations, seeking to balance autonomy and cooperation. The deeper question remains, what does this moment mean for Africa's future? For some, it marks a dangerous flirtation with regional instability. For others, it is the rebirth of confidence long suppressed by dependency. But perhaps, in a broader sense, it represents something simpler. Generation no longer willing to accept silence as stability. The lessons of Alino Faso's story, painful as they are, reveal the complexity of modern African politics, a struggle not between nations, but between visions of what independence truly means. As of today, the border between Burkina Faso and Ivory Coast remains calm but heavily monitored. Talks through regional mediators are ongoing. Both governments have expressed commitment to avoid escalation. Yet the emotional wounds remain raw. Across the continent, young Africans continue to discuss the story not through anger, but through reflection. Many see in Alino Faso's death a reminder that freedom and justice are fragile, and that their protection requires both courage and wisdom. The international community watches closely, aware that what happens in the Sahel often sets precedents for the continent. The next steps taken by both nations will determine whether this moment becomes a turning point or a cautionary tale. The events following Alino Faso's death have done more than spark political debate. They have reignited a philosophical one. Can a nation truly be free if its citizens are not protected wherever they are? Can Africa achieve peace through dignity rather than dependency? And can disagreement among brothers be solved without repeating the tragedies of the past? Burkina Faso's actions have reminded the world that sovereignty, once declared, must also be defended. Ivory Coast's restraint, meanwhile, has demonstrated that diplomacy remains essential. The balance between the two, courage and caution, may define Africa's next chapter. As the sun sets over Ouagadougou, Alino Faso's grave lies surrounded by flowers. Children visit with their parents, reading his quotes etched in stone. His message endures that true independence is built not on confrontation, but on confidence. Across Africa, young people are learning from this story not to glorify conflict, but to understand the value of justice, responsibility, and collective identity. In the quiet of the Sahel evening, a new kind of revolution is unfolding. Not one of guns or slogans, but of minds determined, disciplined, and awake. Perhaps this is what Alino Faso dreamed of, a continent that listens, questions, and rises without losing its humanity. The events of 2025 may be remembered not for the tensions they caused, but for the consciousness they awakened. Because this time, the change is not just political, it is personal. It lives in every young African who now believes that their voice matters. Thank you for watching. If you found this documentary insightful, subscribe to our channel for more stories on African history, leadership, and transformation. Until next time, stay informed, stay inspired, and stay proud.
Good evening, and welcome to Africa Lights News, your trusted source for balanced reporting on the continent's most defining moments. Tonight, we take a closer look at an event that has quietly shaken one of Western and Central Africa. most stable nation's Cameroon. In the heart of Central Africa, a message of reflection and wisdom echoes beyond borders. A message not of division or dominance but of direction, dignity, and discipline from Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso. President Ibrahim Traoré speaks directly to the youth of Cameroon, a nation known for its strength, diversity, and resilience. This message isn't one of judgment. It's one of understanding. It's a call for young people to pause, think deeply, and reclaim their power not through chaos, but through clarity. My brothers and sisters of Cameroon, President Ibrahim Traoré begins, his voice calm yet firm. I understand your anger. These words come at a time when Cameroon's youth, frustrated by unemployment, political stagnation, and rising tensions, are seeking ways to be heard. For many, the re-election of President Paul Biya, one of Africa's longest-serving leaders, feels like a reminder that change is slow, perhaps too slow. But President Ibrahim Traoré's message cuts through the noise of frustration with a tone that blends empathy and caution. He continues, anger without direction becomes destruction, not change. Those words resonate deeply. Across Africa, anger has often been the spark that lights revolutions, but it can also be the same fire that burns down the dreams of generations when left uncontrolled. In the streets of Douala and Yaoundé, emotions are high. Protests have broken out in different forms, both online and offline. Yet, President Ibrahim Traoré reminds the youth that change without strategy becomes chaos. President Ibrahim Traoré is no stranger to youthful passion. At just 36 years old, he leads Burkina Faso, one of the youngest leaders in the world. His rise was not through noise but through conviction. That gives weight to his words. Burning buildings and destroying your own communities will not bring a new future, he says. It only weakens the one you already have. These are not the words of a man condemning the youth, they are the words of someone who has seen what blind anger can cost. Across Africa's history, we've seen countless uprisings from north to south that began with courage but ended in division. The cycle repeats, protests rise, destruction follows, and years later, the same problems remain. President Ibrahim Traoré challenges that pattern. He calls for constructive defiance, standing tall without tearing down one's own foundation. If you truly want transformation, he continues, sit down, think, organize, and act with wisdom. This statement is more than advice, it's a roadmap. President Ibrahim Traoré believes that true power isn't in how loud the youth can shout but in how wisely they can plan. In modern Africa, protest movements have become symbols of youth awakening. From Nigeria's EndSARS movement to South Africa's Fees Must Fall, young people are increasingly refusing to be silent. But as history has shown, passion must meet purpose. Don't let emotion guide what only reason can fix. President Ibrahim Traoré warns, protesting is your right, but protest with intelligence, not violence. Let your message be louder than your destruction. This is a message of balance, a call for protests to remain peaceful, strategic, and visionary. Because when violence takes over, the message gets lost. And when the message is lost, those in power no longer listen, they defend. President Ibrahim Traoré's appeal to the Cameroonian youth is simple but profound. Channel your passion into purpose. Use technology, creativity, and dialogue to express your demands. Don't give those who underestimate you the satisfaction of chaos. One of the most striking parts of his address comes when he says, every young Cameroonian must understand that real power lies in decision, not destruction. Let's pause on that line. Decision, not destruction. In those words lies the essence of leadership, the ability to choose one's path with intention, not reaction. Cameroon's youth, who make up over 60% of the population, have the numbers to shape the nation's destiny. But as President Ibrahim Traoré reminds them, numbers without vision are noise. Power is not just about energy, it's about direction. You can't build a better future with ashes, you build it with ideas, patience, and unity. You can't build a better nation with ashes, he says. Build with ideas, with unity, with peace. This message isn't about taking sides. It's not about supporting or rejecting any particular leader. It's about the youth, understanding that true liberation comes from the mind before it comes from the street. President Ibrahim Traoré continues, Paul Biya's re-election should not make you destroy your country. It should make you rethink your strategy as youth. These are words of reflection, not rebellion. They challenge the youth to look inward, to ask themselves what kind of future they want to inherit, and how best to achieve it. Protesting against something is easy. Building something better is where the real work begins. President Ibrahim Traoré's message reframes the conversation. It's not about whether you support or oppose Biya's government. It's about whether you are ready to lead yourselves intelligently, peacefully, and creatively. And then comes the question, one that pierces through emotions and forces self-reflection. Before you fight, ask yourself, am I fighting for my people or against my own future? That question transforms the tone of the message. It moves it from political commentary to personal awakening. Because sometimes, in the heat of anger, we forget who we are fighting for. Sometimes, the destruction we unleash doesn't hurt those in power, it hurts our own communities. When schools are burnt, markets destroyed, and cities destabilized, the poor suffer most, the very people the youth claim to protect. That's why President Ibrahim Traoré's message isn't just about Cameroon. It's a universal call to Africa's young people. The future cannot be built by destroying what already exists. It must be shaped through dialogue, innovation, and reform. The future belongs to those who can control their emotions and plan their moves with wisdom. This statement reflects one of President Ibrahim Traoré's deepest beliefs, that emotional maturity is the foundation of national transformation. He often speaks about discipline and strategic patience as virtues that Africa's youth must reclaim. Because in the world of politics and social change, emotions are sparks, but wisdom is the engine. You can't drive a revolution with fire alone. You need fuel, structure, vision, and unity. And that's what President Ibrahim Traoré urges the youth of Cameroon to embrace: the discipline to plan, the patience to persist, and the wisdom to act strategically. The message reaches its climax with a clear challenge. Cameroon needs builders, not burners. Be the generation that rises with ideas, not flames. This is the essence of the message, an emotional appeal to young Cameroonians to see themselves not as victims, but as visionaries. Builders are people who see problems and design solutions. Burners, on the other hand, react, they release energy without direction. President Ibrahim Traoré's words remind the youth that Africa's next transformation won't come from the streets alone. It will come from classrooms, digital platforms, farms, tech hubs, and cultural spaces where ideas are born. Every nation reaches a turning point, a moment when the youth must decide what kind of legacy they want to leave. For Cameroon, this may be that moment. The frustration is real: rising unemployment, regional divides, and the feeling that change is out of reach. But history shows that when youth choose to organize instead of vandalize, nations rise. From Ghana's independence movement to South Africa's anti-apartheid struggle, from Burkina Faso's people-led revolutions to Kenya's constitutional reforms, transformation has always begun with organized, peaceful action. And that's what President Ibrahim Traoré is reminding the Cameroonian youth. You are not powerless, you are simply at a crossroads. President Ibrahim Traoré's message transcends borders. It's a reflection of Africa's wider struggle between frustration and transformation. Across the continent, millions of young people are demanding inclusion, justice, and dignity. But how those demands are expressed will determine whether Africa rises or collapses under its own anger. His leadership style, disciplined, minimalist, and patriotic, has made him a voice for Africa's awakening generation. And his words to Cameroon's youth reflect a principle he lives by: emotional intelligence before political action. As the speech draws to a close, President Ibrahim Traoré leaves his audience with hope. His message isn't meant to silence, it's meant to inspire. Be the generation that rises with ideas, not flames. Those words echo beyond Cameroon. They reach every African youth tired of empty promises, every student waiting for opportunity, every young leader afraid to dream bigger. Change doesn't begin when you destroy, it begins when you design. A protest may shake the ground, but ideas reshape the world. President Ibrahim Traoré's message is a reminder that revolution does not always roar, sometimes it whispers. Through the discipline of peaceful change, Cameroon stands at a delicate crossroad. But within its youth lies the greatest force of renewal, the power to rebuild, the courage to rethink, the wisdom to rise above chaos. And as President Ibrahim Traoré reminds them, the future belongs to those who can control their emotions and plan their moves with wisdom. Let history remember this generation not for the fires it lit, but for the light it brought. Because real change, the kind that lasts, begins not in destruction, but in direction. And that, above all, is President Ibrahim Traoré's message to the youth of Cameroon. Be the generation that rises with ideas, not flames. President Ibrahim Traoré. My brothers and sisters, today's message is not just about Burkina Faso, it is about Africa. A message of renewal, integrity, and unity. A call to build, protect, and believe in ourselves. On the first Monday of October, the flag of Burkina Faso rose high over the Colba Palace. It was more than a ceremony, it was a reminder of national pride, sacrifice, and vision. Citizens, soldiers, and leaders gathered to celebrate what they call the days of patriotic commitment and citizen participation, a national event symbolizing dedication to service and progress. During this ceremony, President Captain Ibrahim Traoré delivered a heartfelt message to the people, a message about honesty, community development, and the power of communication in shaping Africa's destiny. Let's explore the highlights and the deeper meaning behind his speech, rewritten for all viewers to learn, reflect, and act. The President began his message with gratitude. Comrades, good morning. I hope everyone woke up feeling well. We are entering the last quarter of the year, 2025, a time to reflect and renew. He paid tribute to the defense and security forces, men and women who continue to work day and night to keep Burkina Faso safe. He also acknowledged the resilience and dedication of ordinary citizens, farmers, teachers, health workers, and youth, all contributing to building a strong nation. This was not just a speech. It was an invitation to continue working hard, to remain united, and to let Burkina Faso's example inspire all of Africa. The first major topic he addressed was integrity, the importance of rejecting fraud and dishonest practices that have hurt many nations across the continent. For years, some individuals have exploited others by pretending to be government agents or claiming that certain payments are required to secure contracts, jobs, or appointments. This not only misleads investors but also discourages honest citizens. The President made it clear. Such behavior has no place in a nation that seeks justice and growth. He emphasized that in the new Burkina Faso, opportunities are earned through transparency and merit, not through shortcuts or corruption. To get a contract, follow the proper process. To request an audience, go through official channels. Do not pay anyone, not even a small amount, for what should be free and fair. This message is not just for Burkinabe citizens. It resonates across Africa, a reminder that true development begins when honesty becomes a national value. Fraud and favoritism destroy trust. And when trust is gone, progress becomes impossible. That is why the government now provides clear communication channels, including the Advisor's Office, Major Projects Department, and protocol services, so that everyone knows where to go and who to speak to. His message was firm but hopeful, warning citizens to stay alert and encouraging them to protect their communities from exploitation. The second part of his message focused on Fashimibo, an initiative born from the spirit of unity. The name itself reflects collective strength, the idea that every citizen can contribute something meaningful to the development of their country. Since its launch, the project has brought together people from all walks of life, workers, entrepreneurs, students, and even members of the diaspora. Its success lies in one simple idea: when everyone contributes, no matter how small, the nation grows stronger. Initially, the program only accepted in-kind donations, materials, tools, and goods. But now, a new digital system has been introduced, the Faso Azika platform, connected to the public treasury. This means that citizens in every region and even Burkinabe abroad can safely and transparently contribute financially to projects in their home region. Each region will have its own account and section on the platform, allowing people to see exactly how contributions are used. Every month, a list of contributors and the amounts donated will be published publicly. This level of transparency is rare, and it sets a new example for governance across Africa. The president encouraged everyone to participate. Let us remember, no one will come to build our homeland for us. It starts with us. Every contribution, no matter the size, helps our regions become more beautiful, more equipped, and more resilient. The message behind Fashimibo is simple. Development is not a gift. It is a duty, a shared effort. The third theme of the speech focused on something often overlooked, but deeply powerful communication. The president referred to the African Universities of Communication, UACO, an event that recently concluded in Ouagadougou. It might not have made global headlines, but it carried profound meaning. He reminded everyone that communication has always been a tool of influence. Throughout history, from colonization to modern times, narratives have been shaped to control how people think and act. It is through communication that divisions are created. It is through communication that nations are weakened. And it is through communication that they try to make us doubt ourselves. This is not a call to silence anyone, it is a call to think critically and to reclaim the power of storytelling. Today, many African media outlets rely heavily on external funding, which can sometimes influence their messages. In some cases, national institutions even spend public money on foreign media companies that do not necessarily share Africa's interests or values. The president revealed that during budget reviews, he discovered financial arrangements where funds were regularly transferred to certain international media outlets. Some state companies had even been made shareholders in these outlets, unknowingly helping to finance content that did not always represent Africa fairly. This realization led to decisive action. The government began withdrawing from such partnerships to ensure that national resources serve the public good. But again, the larger message wasn't about confrontation. It was about awareness, understanding that communication is a form of power, and that Africans must learn to tell their own stories. The president's reflections point to a universal truth. If you don't control your story, someone else will tell it for you, and they might not tell it right. That is why he called on journalists, content creators, and communicators across the continent to use their platforms responsibly, to highlight African achievements, promote peace, and inspire unity, to educate rather than divide, and above all, to protect the dignity of their people through truth and respect. He reminded everyone that media is a double-edged sword. It can build nations or break them. It can inspire hope or spread despair. So, as Africa's young generation rises, it must learn not only to consume information but also to create it wisely. He urged Africans to support their own local media houses to give them the strength and independence needed to tell Africa's stories without distortion or dependency. Communication is a powerful weapon, he said. It can be used for good or for harm. Let us use it to enlighten, to unite, and to build. As the year approaches its end, the president called for renewed responsibility. He encouraged citizens, workers, and institutions to prepare the next national budget with the same spirit of honesty and accountability. The 2026 budget, he said, should be one that truly serves the people, focusing on investments in education, agriculture, and national infrastructure. He also called on citizens to double their efforts in this last quarter to work with purpose, integrity, and optimism. Let us be wise in what we listen to, careful about what we share, and united in what we do. Together, we can transform our nation. These closing words echoed across the crowd at Kolba Palace, a symbol of hope, courage, and responsibility. What makes this speech so powerful is that it speaks to something bigger than borders. It reminds us that the challenges facing Burkina Faso, fraud, disunity, misinformation, are the same challenges faced across Africa. But it also reminds us that solutions exist within us. When citizens refuse to engage in corruption, when communities unite to fund their own development, And when communicators tell the truth, transformation becomes inevitable. The president's tone was not about confrontation. He reminded listeners that patriotism is not just about waving the flag. It's about actions, small daily actions that build trust, protect integrity, and strengthen unity. And that message can resonate anywhere in Ghana, in Nigeria, in Senegal, in Kenya, and beyond. Because Africa's story is shared, and so is its destiny. As the national anthem echoed through the palace courtyard that morning, the words of Captain Ibrahim Traoré carried far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. They spoke to every young African who dreams of a better future, to every worker who refuses to give up, to every leader who understands that power is service, not privilege. The message was simple yet profound. Our destiny is in our hands. Our future begins with our honesty. Our progress depends on our unity. And as the flag waved under the October sun, one truth became clear: Africa is rising. Not through aid, not through fear, but through the power of its people. If this message inspired you, don't forget to leave a comment below. What part of the president's address spoke to you the most? Do you believe Africa is ready to reclaim its narrative and build its future through unity and truth? Subscribe, share this message, and stay tuned for more inspiring stories of leadership, transformation, and hope across the continent. Together, we build. Together, we rise. Burkina Faso. Africa. United for progress.